3 years after I left Atlanta, I still remembered the exact sound my front door made when it closed behind me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just final. I carried one suitcase, a laptop I could barely afford, and exactly 4,286.17 in my checking account. My family believed I would be back before the month ended. My father actually laughed as I loaded my car. "You'll learn," he said. My mother never hugged me goodbye. My younger sister, Brielle, stood beside them in the driveway wearing the smile she always wore whenever life handed her another victory that should have been mine. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. 3 years later, I was sitting inside the corner office of Brooks Crisis Advisory, looking through acquisition documents worth $14.8 million while rain tapped gently against the windows overlooking downtown Seattle. The office smelled faintly of coffee and polished cedar. My assistant had already left for the evening, leaving only the quiet hum of the city below. Silence had become my favorite sound. Growing up, silence never meant peace. It meant someone was angry. Usually my father. He believed respect was measured by obedience and appearances. Every conversation revolved around status, reputation, and what people in church would think. My mother enforced those rules with softer words. Family sacrifices for family. She repeated it so often that it sounded almost comforting. Until I realized the sacrifices always came from me. Never from Brielle. Brielle had lighter skin than I did. Relatives called her the pretty one before either of us was old enough to understand what those words really meant. They admired her curls. They praised her smile. They talked about her future as though success had already been promised. I learned to collect achievements because compliments rarely arrived on their own. Straight A's, scholarships, internships, leadership awards. None of them outweighed the simple fact that Brielle was the daughter everyone wanted to celebrate. The day everything changed was my college award ceremony. I still remembered every detail. The bright auditorium lights, the applause, the scholarship certificate resting carefully inside my hands, and the announcement my father made later that evening, in front of relatives, friends, neighbors, everyone. "We've decided Naomi's college fund should go to Brielle instead." The room became strangely quiet. Someone actually laughed because they assumed it was a joke. It wasn't. My father slid the paperwork across the dining room table. 82,450, money my grandparents had started saving before I could even walk. Money everyone had always told me belonged to my education. My mother reached for my hand. "You're stronger," she said gently. "You'll figure life out." Then she smiled at Brielle. "She has the brighter future." I looked around that room one last time. Nobody argued. Nobody defended me. Even Brielle accepted the gift without hesitation. That moment taught me something business school never could. People reveal exactly who they are when money changes hands. I left 6 weeks later. I never asked for another dollar. Seattle wasn't easy. I worked mornings, studied nights, consulted on weekends. Some weeks I survived on instant noodles and stubbornness. Other weeks I wondered whether my father had been right. Those thoughts disappeared every time another client trusted me with their company during its worst day. One successful project became another, then another. Eventually, Fortune 500 executives started requesting me by name. Today, my firm advised corporations facing fraud investigations, executive scandals, hostile acquisitions, and financial crises. Ironically, I had become an expert at protecting businesses from the exact kind of manipulation I grew up living through. My parents never knew. I never told them. They thought I disappeared. What they didn't know was that disappearing had been the smartest decision I ever made. My phone almost never rang after business hours. Everyone important knew to contact my executive assistant first. So when my personal phone vibrated across the desk at exactly 7:42 p.m., I frowned before reaching for it. The screen lit up. One name. Mom. I stared at it while it continued ringing. 3 years. Not one birthday. Not one holiday. Not one congratulations. Nothing. Now she was calling. Outside, thunder rolled across the Seattle skyline. Inside, my office suddenly felt much smaller. The phone stopped, then immediately started ringing again. I let it ring 4 more times before answering. Hello. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard her breathing. Older. Slower. Almost uncertain. Naomi? Her voice sounded strangely careful. Yes. I wasn't sure this was still your number. It is. Another silence settled between us. I could almost hear her searching for familiar ground. How have you been? I looked at the city stretching beyond the glass. I've been well. I'm glad. She didn't ask where I lived. She didn't ask what I did. She didn't apologize. Instead, she cleared her throat. I need to tell you something. I closed the acquisition file in front of me. My instincts sharpened. People rarely reopened closed relationships without a reason. Especially my family. I'm listening. Another pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she finally said the words that made every memory return at once. Your sister needs you. My mother's unexpected call quickly revealed why my family had finally remembered I existed. As she described Brielle's lavish wedding and the man everyone admired, old wounds reopened, exposing years of favoritism, colorism, and conditional love. Then one familiar company name transformed a family invitation into something far more dangerous. My mother's voice remained unusually soft after those 4 words. Your sister needs you. I leaned back in my chair and watched rain slide down the office windows overlooking downtown Seattle. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold against the glass, reminding me how far I had traveled to build a life untouched by my family's expectations. What does Brielle need from me? I asked evenly. She hesitated before answering. She's getting married. I said nothing. The silence stretched long enough that my mother continued filling it herself. The wedding is in 3 weeks. I closed my eyes for a moment. 3 years without a birthday call. 3 years without a holiday message. 3 years of complete silence. Now there was a wedding. I see, I replied. You'll come home, won't you? Not how have you been? Not we're sorry. Just an expectation disguised as a question. I wasn't aware Brielle was engaged. Oh, everything happened so quickly, my mother said with forced excitement. Ethan proposed 6 months ago. He's successful. Brilliant. Everyone says she's marrying the perfect man. I let her continue. She always revealed more when she believed she controlled the conversation. The venue alone cost over $480,000, she said proudly. It's the most beautiful estate outside Atlanta. His family insisted on making it unforgettable. My fingers rested quietly on my desk. My parents had once claimed they couldn't afford to invest in my future. Now they celebrated a wedding that cost nearly $500,000. The irony almost made me smile. What exactly do you need from me? I asked. We're family. There it was. The phrase I had heard my entire childhood. Family. A word that somehow always required my sacrifice. Never theirs. My mother's tone became warmer. People have been asking about you. It would look strange if Brielle's sister wasn't there. I noticed she still hadn't mentioned missing me. Only appearances. That hadn't changed. Across the office, the digital clock shifted to 7:58 p.m. Outside, thunder rolled softly across Puget Sound. Inside, memories returned with uncomfortable clarity. When I was 10 years old, relatives gathered for Easter dinner. My grandmother smiled proudly after I recited an entire poem from memory. Before she finished praising me, my father interrupted. Naomi's smart, he said, but Brielle has the prettier smile. Everyone laughed politely. I laughed too. Children learn quickly when laughter is expected. Another memory followed. I was 15 when I earned first place in a statewide academic competition. The principal called my parents personally. My mother congratulated me. Then she spent the drive home talking about how Brielle would look beautiful at the upcoming beauty pageant. My achievement disappeared before we even reached our driveway. By 17, I understood the pattern. Whenever I accomplished something, the conversation somehow became about Brielle. Every scholarship, every award, every opportunity. Something I earned somehow became another reason to celebrate my younger sister. Even our appearances became part of that comparison. Relatives described Brielle's lighter complexion as graceful and elegant. Mine was called striking, professional, too serious, too intimidating. The word followed me everywhere. My father especially enjoyed repeating it. You'd be prettier if you smiled more, he often said. People don't like women who look intimidating. For years, I believed him. Until I entered boardrooms where confidence mattered more than approval. The very quality my family criticized became the reason executives trusted me with billion-dollar decisions. Life had a remarkable sense of humor. My mother's voice interrupted my thoughts. Ethan owns Carlyle's strategic holdings. The name settled into the room with unexpected weight. Carlyle. I had heard it before. Not at family gatherings. Not in Atlanta. Somewhere else. Recently. My mind automatically searched through hundreds of corporate files. Years of investigations. Financial reports. Risk assessments. Then something clicked. Carlyle Strategic Holdings. I kept my breathing steady. What kind of company is it? I asked casually. Oh, investment management, development, charitable foundations. Pride filled her voice. He's only 34 and already worth millions. Interesting. Very interesting. What does Brielle do now? She's helping with wedding planning full-time. Of course she was. My mother laughed softly. You should see the guest list. Judges, executives, politicians, donors. This wedding will open so many doors. For whom? The question stayed inside my head. My instincts had begun whispering something I had learned never to ignore. Corporate crises rarely announced themselves loudly. They appeared quietly. A familiar name. An unusual transaction. A conversation that didn't quite fit. Something about Ethan Carlyle suddenly felt exactly like that. What day is the ceremony? I asked. Saturday, the 21st. I'll think about it. My mother's warmth cooled immediately. What is there to think about? I have clients. You always put work first. I almost laughed. The woman who hadn't called me once in 3 years suddenly wanted to lecture me about priorities. I'll let you know. Before she could argue further, I ended the call. The office became silent again. I remained perfectly still. They believed they had surprised me. What they didn't know was that one company name had awakened memories far beyond my childhood. I turned toward my desk. My firm maintained a secure internal database containing due diligence reports, litigation histories, forensic accounting summaries, and confidential corporate intelligence gathered during client engagements. Access required biometric verification. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The monitor illuminated. Search field. One name. Carlyle Strategic Holdings. The system processed for only 2 seconds. Then a confidential case file appeared. The status banner flashed across the screen in bold red letters. Active investigation. The warmth drained from my hands. I opened the file. My blood ran cold. After discovering Ethan Carlyle's name in my firm's secure database, I remembered a sealed flash drive my retired mentor had entrusted to me years earlier. Inside was a carefully documented investigation exposing a network of fraud hidden beneath polished success. That single night forced me to choose between protecting the family that had discarded me or protecting innocent people who still had no idea they were being exploited. I stared at the red banner across my computer screen long after the file finished loading. Active investigation. The words seemed almost unreal. Seattle's rain tapped steadily against the windows, each drop blending into the quiet rhythm of my office. I had spent years reviewing sensitive corporate intelligence, but very few names had ever made my pulse slow instead of quicken. Ethan Carlisle was one of them. I didn't open the file immediately. Instead, I leaned back and searched my memory. I had seen that surname before. Not during a client meeting. Not inside a courtroom. Somewhere much more personal. Then I remembered. Attorney Harold Bennett. A smile crossed my face despite everything. Harold had never been loud. He didn't impress clients with dramatic speeches or oversized confidence. He believed facts always outlasted emotion, and he spent 40 years proving that principle inside courtrooms across the country. He became my mentor during my first internship after law school. While everyone else admired my grades, Harold admired my patience. Most people react, he once told me. You observe. That lesson changed my career. Years later, when he announced his retirement, I visited him one final time. His office overlooked Elliott Bay, where ferries crossed gray water beneath heavy clouds. Cardboard boxes filled the room, and decades of framed victories had already disappeared from the walls. He looked older than I remembered. Not weaker. Just finished. Without explanation, he opened his desk drawer and placed a small sealed flash drive between us. A single white label covered the front. No company logo. No case number. Only one handwritten word. Carlisle. I frowned. What is this? Harold folded his hands calmly. I hope you never need it. His answer only raised more questions. If that's true, why give it to me? Because someday your judgment may matter more than mine. I studied the drive without touching it. There are rules? He nodded once. Only one. His voice became unusually serious. If the Carlisle family ever enters your life personally, open it. I laughed softly. Personally? I mean exactly what I said. What if they never do? Then destroy it after I'm gone. I searched his expression for an explanation. There wasn't one. He simply stood, shook my hand, and wished me success. That was the last time I ever saw him. 3 months later, I attended his funeral. The flash drive stayed locked inside my apartment safe. Untouched. Until now. I left the office shortly after 9. Seattle greeted me with cold air carrying the scent of wet pavement and cedar. Streetlights reflected across rain-soaked sidewalks while distant traffic hummed beneath the evening sky. By 9:48 p.m., I unlocked my apartment door. The familiar silence welcomed me. No television. No music. Just rain striking the windows overlooking the city. I crossed the living room and entered my home office. The safe sat behind a framed landscape photograph. My fingerprint unlocked it with a quiet click. Inside rested passports, corporate documents, emergency cash, and one sealed flash drive. Exactly where I had left it. For years, I had wondered why Harold trusted me with something he refused to explain. Now I finally understood. I peeled away the aging security seal. The room suddenly felt colder. The drive connected instantly to my encrypted workstation. One folder appeared. Bennett Archive. I opened it. Hundreds of files filled the screen. Federal civil complaints. Corporate registrations. Forensic accounting summaries. Tax correspondence. Property transfers. Trust agreements. Banking records. Every document had been organized with meticulous precision. Harold hadn't collected rumors. He had assembled evidence. The first memorandum explained everything. Carlyle's strategic holdings appeared legitimate on paper, but dozens of shell companies quietly shifted investor funds through layered transactions designed to conceal ownership. Several charitable foundations shared directors with private investment entities. Grant money intended for community housing programs disappeared through consulting agreements that existed only on invoices. I kept reading. Another folder documented forged subscription agreements presented to elderly investors. Many victims lived in historically black neighborhoods. Retirees, widows, church trustees, people who believed they were funding scholarships and affordable housing. Instead, their savings financed luxury acquisitions and offshore accounts. A spreadsheet summarized estimated losses. The total exceeded 27.4 million. I felt my jaw tighten. Harold hadn't stopped there. Witness interviews, email archives, property records. Every piece connected to the next until a clear pattern emerged. This wasn't one dishonest businessman making questionable decisions. This was a carefully engineered fraud hiding behind polished suits, charity dinners, and expensive smiles. Then I opened the final folder. Person of interest, Ethan Carlyle. His photograph appeared beside a timeline documenting meetings, signatures, and financial approvals. Everything pointed toward him. My family believed Betrayal had found the perfect husband. What they didn't know was that they were preparing to celebrate a man whose success rested on deception. I leaned away from the screen. For the first time since my mother's phone call, uncertainty crept into my thoughts. Did I owe them anything? My father had spent years measuring my worth against my sister's appearance. My mother had wrapped manipulation inside words like loyalty and sacrifice. Neither had ever protected me. Neither had apologized. If I stayed in Seattle, they would face the consequences of their own choices. Part of me believed that was justice. Another part remembered something else. The victims. Faces from witness statements. Retired teachers. Grandparents. Veterans. People who trusted promises because trust was all they had left. They hadn't betrayed me. They were still being exploited. The decision became painfully simple. This wasn't about earning my family's love anymore. That chapter of my life had already ended. This was about stopping someone who believed wealth erased accountability. Rain continued striking the windows while the city faded into darkness beyond the glass. I stood alone inside my apartment. No tears came. They weren't necessary. The daughter who kept hoping her parents would finally choose her quietly disappeared that night. In her place stood someone who understood patience, evidence, and timing. I wasn't returning home to reclaim my place in the family. I was returning because strategy required proximity. At 11:37 p.m., I closed every file, encrypted the archive, and reached for my laptop. Within minutes, a confirmation email appeared. One-way flight to Atlanta. Departure, 8:10 a.m. Friday. I looked at the reservation one final time before shutting the computer. I had booked a one-way flight home. Not to reconcile. To finish something. The first thing I noticed when I stepped through my parents' front door wasn't the decorations. It was the smell. Fresh cinnamon, roasted chicken, and polished hardwood carried me backward through years I had spent trying to forget. Every photograph on the hallway wall remained exactly where I remembered it. The only difference was that I was no longer searching for my place inside them. My mother crossed the living room before I could set my suitcase down. There you are. She wrapped her arms around me with practiced warmth. For a moment, anyone watching would have believed we had never been apart. I'm glad you came, she whispered. So am I answered. It wasn't a lie. I was glad I had come. Just not for the reason she imagined. My father appeared a moment later wearing the same confident smile that had once decided every conversation before it began. "You look successful," he said, looking me up and down. "I've been busy. I heard you have some consulting company." "I do." He nodded politely, already losing interest. "Well, this wedding will introduce you to people who can really help your career." I almost smiled. What they didn't know was that several people attending the wedding had already been clients of mine. They believed they were offering me an opportunity. In reality, I understood that room far better than they ever would. The afternoon passed in a blur of floral deliveries, catering schedules, and family members pretending nothing uncomfortable had ever happened. No one mentioned the years of silence. No one apologized. It was as if my absence had been a scheduling conflict instead of a consequence. Late that evening, I finally met Ethan. He entered carrying himself like a man accustomed to admiration. Perfect suit, confident handshake, expensive watch. Everything about him had been carefully selected to communicate success before he spoke a single word. "So you're Naomi," he said. "I am. Betrayal has told me a little about you." "I'm sure she has." He laughed. "I hear you're in crisis consulting." "That's right." He took a sip of his drink before smiling. "So, corporate babysitting." Several guests laughed politely. I didn't. "It's rewarding work," I replied. "I'm sure it is." His tone suggested otherwise. "I prefer building companies instead of cleaning up other people's mistakes." I held his gaze. Someone has to understand both. His smile tightened for only a second before returning. "I like confidence. I've found it's useful." He leaned slightly closer. "I imagine weddings like this aren't exactly part of your usual world." Before I answered, Betrayal touched his arm. "Ethan." "What?" "I'm just making conversation." I watched the exchange quietly. People who underestimated others often revealed themselves faster than they intended. He wasn't trying to understand me. He was measuring me. And he had already reached the wrong conclusion. Dinner brought more introductions. Bankers, developers, private investors, board members. Every conversation circled around money, influence, and appearances. Ethan seemed determined to remind everyone how successful he was. Our newest acquisition closed at just over $18 million. The lake house renovation cost more than expected. We're expanding into 2 additional markets next year. Every sentence carried another number, another achievement, another reason people should admire him. My father looked genuinely impressed. "So young," he said proudly. "You've accomplished more than most people ever will." Ethan accepted the compliment without hesitation. "I've been fortunate." Fortunate. Interesting choice of words. Across the table, I noticed a leather portfolio resting beside Ethan's chair. Whenever someone asked him a question about business, he opened it briefly before answering. Inside were contracts, financial schedules, corporate documents. He treated them carelessly, like trophies, not evidence. They had absolutely no idea I had spent years recognizing small details other people ignored. A signature, an amendment, a missing date. Those details had built my entire career. The following morning, wedding preparations filled every room of the house. Florists arrived before sunrise. Musicians rehearsed. Event coordinators rushed through hallways carrying clipboards. Everyone focused on making everything appear perfect. That made observation remarkably easy. While helping organize guest packets, I found myself alone near Ethan's temporary office. The portfolio sat open on the desk. No one else was nearby. I didn't touch anything unnecessarily. Instead, I photographed only the pages visible in plain sight. Corporate letterheads, entity names, transaction summaries. Nothing removed, nothing disturbed, just images. Later that afternoon, I compared those names with publicly available corporate filings. Several matched companies that appeared unusually interconnected through registered agents and recent ownership transfers. The pattern looked familiar. Not enough for a conclusion. Enough for concern. I requested additional public records through databases my firm routinely accessed. Every search strengthened the same quiet suspicion. Money had been moving in circles. Ownership shifted repeatedly between businesses sharing directors. Consulting fees flowed through companies that reported almost no employees. Individually, none of it proved wrongdoing. Together, the structure deserved much closer examination. At exactly 6:12 p.m., my phone vibrated. Marcus. I stepped outside before answering. How's Atlanta? He asked. Predictable. And Ethan? He enjoys hearing himself talk. Marcus chuckled softly. That's useful. It usually is. What have you found? Enough to keep looking. He paused. And your family? I watched evening sunlight settle across the neighborhood where I had once dreamed of belonging. They still believe I'm here because I miss them. And do you? No. What do you need from me? Keep monitoring the filings I sent. You'll have them within the hour. I smiled. Marcus never asked unnecessary questions. He trusted my judgment because I had earned it. Before ending the call, he said quietly, "Be patient." I will. People who think they've already won usually make the biggest mistakes. I know. Back inside, laughter echoed through the dining room. Wedding planners congratulated my parents. Relatives praised Brielle's dress. Ethan accepted compliments as naturally as breathing. They believed the celebration was unfolding exactly as planned. They thought they were winning. The rehearsal began the following afternoon inside the grand ballroom where crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Guests applauded every perfectly timed entrance. Champagne flowed freely. Music filled the room. Near the stage, Ethan signed one final contract handed to him by an associate without reading more than the signature page. He smiled confidently as the ink dried. No one reacted. No one noticed. I did. And in that quiet moment, I realized he had just made the worst decision of his life. The ballroom looked like the kind of place designed to impress people before a single word was spoken. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the grand staircase, while servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Every table held carefully arranged white roses, and every conversation seemed to revolve around success, influence, or opportunity. I paused just inside the entrance and quietly observed the room. Judges greeted business executives. City council members shook hands with investors. Nonprofit directors exchanged business cards with attorneys. The groom stood in the center of it all, smiling as though the evening had been built entirely around his reputation. He welcomed every compliment with effortless confidence. From a distance, he looked untouchable. That was exactly the image he wanted everyone to believe. What almost no one realized was that appearances can survive for years while the truth quietly gathers strength underneath them. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blazer and walked toward my assigned table without drawing attention to myself. My parents noticed me immediately. "There she is," my mother said brightly. She kissed my cheek as though we had always shared an easy relationship. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." My father straightened his jacket. "I hope tonight reminds you how important family is. I've learned many lessons about family." He smiled, completely missing the meaning behind my answer. Across the room, the groom raised a glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you all for celebrating with us." Applause echoed through the ballroom. He spoke confidently about gratitude, community, and building a future based on trust. Several guests nodded approvingly. His words were polished. His delivery was flawless. His performance deserved the applause it received. The only problem was that it was still a performance. As dinner progressed, conversations became louder and more relaxed. The groom eventually approached my table carrying a confident smile. "So," he said, "I've heard you're some kind of business consultant. I advise organizations during difficult situations." He laughed. "So you clean up messes after real executives make decisions." A few nearby guests smiled politely. I simply took a sip of water. "I help organizations protect themselves." Sounds like expensive babysitting. I've heard that comparison before. He leaned slightly closer. "You know, success isn't really something you can teach. No, it's something people either have or they don't." I met his eyes without changing my expression. "I suppose time usually answers that question." He chuckled. "I like confidence." "So do I." For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then it disappeared behind another practiced smile. He turned toward the surrounding guests. "I've built everything I own from the ground up." Several people applauded again. He enjoyed admiration almost as much as he enjoyed hearing himself speak. That made him predictable. People who constantly seek attention often overlook the quiet moments happening around them. Near the ballroom entrance, several unfamiliar visitors entered without interrupting the celebration. Dark suits. Professional expressions. No dramatic announcements. They spoke calmly with venue management before moving toward another corner of the room. Most guests never noticed them. I did. The groom didn't. Music continued. Conversations continued. The celebration continued. For another few minutes, everything appeared perfectly normal. Then one of the visitors approached the wedding planner and quietly requested a private conversation with the groom. He looked mildly annoyed. "Can this wait until tomorrow?" "I'm afraid it can't." His smile became noticeably tighter. "What is this about?" "We'd prefer to discuss that privately." He laughed loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "If this is another paperwork issue, my attorneys can handle it Monday." The room gradually became quieter. People naturally sensed when something unexpected interrupted carefully planned events. The groom glanced toward me. "This is probably another misunderstanding created by consultants who think paperwork matters more than business." A few uncomfortable laughs followed. He clearly expected everyone to join him. I remained silent. He pointed in my direction. "People spend too much time looking for problems that don't exist." Still, I said nothing. One of the visitors calmly placed a folder on a nearby table. "We're simply requesting your cooperation." The groom crossed his arms. "I don't have to cooperate with harassment." Silence spread across the ballroom. My parents looked from him to me with growing confusion. "What exactly is happening?" My mother whispered. I didn't answer. Instead, I quietly removed a small flash drive from my purse and placed it beside the folder already resting on the table. No speeches. No accusations. No dramatic gestures. Just one small object. The groom looked at it and laughed. "Is this supposed to scare me?" I folded my hands and waited. He picked up the drive without plugging it into anything. "This?" he asked loudly. "This is your evidence?" I continued saying nothing. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Conversations stopped completely. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. The silence became impossible to ignore. People shifted uneasily in their chairs. The groom began filling the silence himself. "This is ridiculous." No response. "I've never hidden anything." Still nothing. "My companies have always followed the law." Another pause. He continued talking. "Every transaction has been documented." He stopped suddenly, realizing what he had just volunteered. No one had mentioned transactions. He looked around the room. Faces that had been smiling only moments earlier now watched him carefully. One of the visitors calmly opened the folder. "We appreciate your clarification." The groom swallowed. I didn't mean, but he kept talking. Every attempt to explain created another contradiction. Every new statement forced him to revise the previous one. The confidence that had filled the ballroom only minutes earlier slowly disappeared. My parents stared at me. For the first time since I had returned home, they weren't looking at me as the overlooked daughter. They were looking at someone they no longer recognized. I never interrupted. I never celebrated. Sometimes the strongest position is simply refusing to rescue someone from their own words. Eventually, the groom's voice became noticeably quieter. The room remained perfectly still. My father looked at me, his expression stripped of certainty. His lips parted slightly. Naomi. He had spoken my name thousands of times before. This time was different. For the first time in his life, he said it with fear. By the following Monday morning, every headline told a slightly different version of the same story. A respected investment group had come under intense regulatory scrutiny. Several affiliated businesses suspended operations while auditors reviewed years of financial records. Civil lawsuits began appearing one after another, each one revealing another layer of promises that had quietly unraveled behind polished presentations and expensive suits. I sat in my hotel room overlooking the Atlanta skyline, reading every update without satisfaction. Justice and celebration had never been the same thing. A cup of black coffee cooled beside my laptop while early sunlight filtered through the curtains. The city outside was already awake, yet my room remained remarkably quiet. Silence gave me room to think. For years I imagined that one day my family would finally understand what they had done. Now I wasn't sure understanding would change anything. My phone vibrated. Marcus, how are you holding up? He asked. I'm surprisingly calm. I figured you would be. I keep waiting to feel victorious. And? I mostly feel finished. He paused before speaking again. Sometimes closure doesn't sound like applause. I smiled to myself. No, I said softly. Sometimes it sounds like a door closing. After ending the call, I opened another file. Dozens of emails had arrived overnight from attorneys representing retirees, nonprofit organizations, and former investors searching for guidance. Many of them had spent years believing their savings were helping scholarships, housing programs, or neighborhood projects. Instead, confusion had replaced confidence. Those people deserved answers. They deserved honesty. That mattered far more than my family's opinions. Over the next 3 days, I volunteered alongside a legal aid organization helping affected investors understand their options. We explained financial disclosures, reviewed contracts, and connected families with experienced attorneys who specialized in complex civil litigation. One elderly couple held my hands after a meeting. We thought we'd lost everything, the husband whispered. You haven't lost your voice, I replied. And that's where rebuilding starts. His wife nodded through quiet tears. Walking back to my car that afternoon, I realized something important. Helping strangers felt easier than convincing my own parents to value me. Perhaps it always had. Late Wednesday evening, my sister called. I almost let the phone ring. Instead, I answered. Hello. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. When she finally did, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I didn't know. I believe you. I signed papers because everyone said they were routine. I know. They told me not to read everything. I closed my eyes briefly. So many people make that mistake. I'm sorry. The words hung between us. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Simply honest. I wish I had asked more questions, she continued. I wish I had stood up for you years ago. Neither of us tried to rewrite the past. Some wounds become scars because pretending they never happened only makes them deeper. I hope you build a different future, I told her. What about us? I looked through the hotel window toward the fading sunset. I don't know yet. It wasn't punishment. It was the truth. Forgiveness cannot be rushed simply because someone suddenly feels regret. The next afternoon, my parents arrived unexpectedly. The hotel receptionist called my room first. "They're asking if you'll see them." I considered the question for nearly a minute. Finally, I agreed. They entered together, looking noticeably older than they had only a week earlier. My father no longer carried himself with unquestioned certainty. My mother's eyes remained swollen from crying. Neither spoke immediately. My father finally broke the silence. "We made mistakes." I waited. "We should have treated you differently." Another pause. Then my mother stepped forward. "Please help us." There it was. Not "how can we make this right?" Not "what do you need?" They still wanted something. My father continued. "People aren't returning our calls. The bank froze several accounts. Our lawyer says this could take years." Every sentence centered on consequences, not accountability. I listened quietly until they finished. Then I asked one question. "If none of this had happened, would you have called me?" Neither answered. They looked at the floor. That silence gave me everything I needed. For years I had hoped they would choose me because I was their daughter. Now I understood they had only come because they believed I could solve another problem. The pattern had never changed. Only the circumstances had. "I truly hope you find good legal representation," I said calmly. My mother reached for my hand. "Naomi, please." I stepped back. I've spent my entire life rescuing relationships that only existed when I was useful. Fresh tears filled her eyes. "I can't keep doing that." My father lowered his head. "We're your family." "I know. And that's exactly why this hurts." No one raised their voice. No one argued. The conversation simply ended because there was nothing left to defend. I picked up my coat and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper my name one last time. I paused only long enough to place my room key on the table. Then I walked into the hallway. The elevator doors opened almost immediately. As they closed, I caught one final glimpse of the room that had held every apology I once dreamed of hearing. None of them arrived early enough. Outside, warm Georgia air greeted me as the evening sky turned shades of orange and deep blue. For the first time since leaving home years earlier, I didn't feel like I was escaping. I felt like I was choosing. Behind me, I heard my mother crying. I never turned around. 9 months changed more lives than the previous 9 years ever had. The headlines disappeared first. News cycles always moved on. Court hearings became routine. Civil cases slowly worked through the legal system, and the people who once filled banquet halls with confident speeches quietly entered government buildings through side doors instead. Public admiration faded faster than anyone expected. Reputation, I learned, was often the most fragile investment of all. I watched the changes from my office overlooking Elliott Bay. The same rains still drifted across the Seattle skyline. The same ferries crossed the water every morning. Only I had changed. My company had grown beyond anything I imagined when I packed one suitcase and drove away from Atlanta. We opened offices in Chicago, Toronto, and London, helping organizations rebuild trust after leadership failures, financial misconduct, and public crises. Ironically, the little girl who had been told she was too intimidating now earned her living teaching executives how to lead with integrity. Life had a remarkable sense of balance. One quiet afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a leadership conference for young professionals. Standing backstage, I looked through the curtain at hundreds of faces waiting to hear someone else's story. Years ago, that room would have terrified me. Now it felt like purpose. I didn't speak about my family. I spoke about resilience. I spoke about preparation. I spoke about choosing principles over popularity. When the applause ended, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous. "I almost didn't apply to law school," she admitted. People kept telling me I wasn't the right fit. I smiled because I recognized that look. I had worn it myself. What did you decide? I applied anyway. Good. She laughed softly. I just wanted you to know your story helped. She walked away before I could answer. Sometimes that is how healing works. It arrives quietly, not with fireworks, with footsteps. Several weeks later, our board approved the project I had been planning for nearly a year. The Brooks Legacy Scholarship, an endowment supporting young women pursuing careers in business, finance, public policy, and law. Not because anyone had rescued me, because someone else deserved a beginning that wasn't shaped by doubt. Watching the first group of recipients meet one another reminded me that opportunity multiplies when it is shared. One student hugged her acceptance letter before reading the entire page. Another called her grandmother through tears. A third stood silently, smiling at the future she could finally imagine. That afternoon mattered more to me than every award hanging in my office. Success had once meant proving people wrong. Now it meant helping someone else prove themselves right. I heard small updates about my family through distant relatives. My father rarely attended the community events where he had once enjoyed being recognized. Without admiration, he seemed uncertain who he wanted to become. My mother kept mostly to herself. People eventually grew tired of conversations built around appearances instead of honesty. Loneliness has a way of exposing truths that applause can hide. As for my younger sister, I heard she had moved into a modest apartment and accepted an entry-level position at a nonprofit organization. For the first time in her life, she was building something that belonged entirely to her. I genuinely hoped she succeeded. Not because the past had disappeared, because carrying bitterness forever would have allowed it to keep controlling me. One evening, I found the old house key I had carried since leaving Atlanta. It had remained inside a small wooden box for years. I turned it over in my hand for several seconds before placing it back. Some doors no longer need to be opened to prove they exist. The greatest freedom is realizing you no longer feel compelled to walk through them. As the sun disappeared behind the Seattle skyline, warm light reflected across the water below my office windows. The city grew quieter. So did my thoughts. For years, I believed healing would arrive the moment my family finally admitted they were wrong. It never happened that way. Healing began the moment I stopped asking people to become who they had repeatedly shown me they were not. That decision changed everything. If my journey has taught me anything, it is this: your value is never determined by the people who fail to recognize it. The world will always contain voices eager to measure your worth by their own limitations. You don't have to accept their measurements. Build your own table. Create your own opportunities. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your growth instead of fearing it. And when someone tries to convince you that love must be earned through endless sacrifice, remember this instead: the strongest victories are the quiet ones. The ones where you leave with your peace, your dignity, and your future completely intact. Because the greatest revenge isn't watching someone else fall. It's building a life so full of purpose that you never need to look back.